Next, I would like to introduce two speakers who, through their presentations, will set the stage for the discussions that will follow. Their detailed biodata are in the program. The first speaker, Mr. Vinod Rai, is a former Distinguished Visiting Research Fellow at ISAS and a former Comptroller and Auditor General of India. He served in key roles in both state and central governments, including as District Collector of Thrissur in the southern state of Kerala and as Kerala's Finance Secretary. At the national level, he worked in the Commerce, Defense, and Finance ministries and sat on the boards of major institutions. Internationally, he held senior positions in global audit organizations and served as a trustee of the IFRS Foundation until December 2023. Mr. Rai, may I now invite you to come up on stage and deliver your remarks?
Thank you, Divya. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you. It's a lovely time for us to be getting together and discussing the issues which have been pointed out today. And the stage couldn't have been set better by what the Minister just mentioned this morning. He laid it out beautifully and brought India, China, and the Singapore connections this morning. I will briefly give you the Indian's perspective of what this entire issue is all about. And I would like to break it into three parts and very brief give you the state of the Indian economy as it stands today, where it is. Number two, what has India been subjected to? What are we likely to be facing and where we stand vis-a-vis the announcements which have emanated from Washington regarding tariff? And number three, what the Minister also called the complex relationship that we have with our neighbor China and how it is scheduled to be playing out from the Indian perspective in the years to come. Now, very briefly, as of September this year, the Indian economy seems to be showing very robust growth. The quarter, Q1 that we just finished, has shown a growth rate of about 7.6% in the GDP, about 0.2% higher than what it was in the previous quarter, and definitely much higher in the previous years. The surprising thing is that manufacturing has been very good, so has the farm sector. Our services have been doing well, and the services sector in first quarter was exceedingly good too, the growth. Now, this also shows that, as was mentioned by Professor Shipke in the morning, that 50% of growth emanating from China and India, global growth emanating from China and India. To that extent, India continues to register its growth as one of the fastest growing economies in the world today. The services sector has done exceedingly well, and we contribute about 52 to 54% of the GDP. Agriculture, which was a bit of a laggard as far as India was concerned, is now showing some development, some modernization, some growth in the sector. Manufacturing, especially MSME kind of sectors, have also shown interesting growth in the last 2 to 3 years. And the government has been taking steps to ensure that that sector comes of age. Now, I don't want to get into issues regarding inflation, fiscal deficit and all. It's well known. These factors, the numbers are all known to each one of you. The economists reckon that H1, the first half of the current fiscal year, India will continue to demonstrate good growth. But then there is a gray area, the gray clouds, which will be introduced by tariff, that will be kicked in possibly after September, and that's where the latter half of the current fiscal is going to show strains in the growth. Government policies, government has been laying a lot of emphasis on investment in infrastructure. They are trying to lead the growth and to ensure that the government is the initiator and to bring in private sector to invest in infrastructure. Key infrastructure projects have been ports, roads, railroad, metros, power, etc. Issues about sustainability, we'll be coming to it in a while. Now, the manufacturing MSME, why it is important for India is because the MSME sector employs roughly 750 million persons in about 10 million of these enterprises within the country, and it contributes to about 45% of India's export. Now, that is a sector which has, as far as the government is concerned, government has no option but to try and support that sector, both from the employment perspective and from the growth and the export development perspective. And to that extent, government has been making attempts with the manufacturing output and trying to the turnover and the limits enhance it by about 2.5 to 2 times, both to ensure that the sector is provided adequate infrastructural support in terms of financing, power, water, land, etc., to ensure that this growth continues. Now, innovation is something that the government has been laying great emphasis on, and this innovation, whether it's in terms of AI, machine learning, algorithms, or human-like earning capabilities, etc., have found emphasis in successive budgets that what I would call the Modi 3.0 government, which came into power last year, there has been a certain consistency in the policy that they have followed to ensure that these sectors, investment in these sectors has continued. And I think the most recent has been the reform that the government has brought about with the participation of the member states of the country on GST, where the slabs have been reduced, the tax rates have been reduced, and a huge amount of transformation has been brought up to ensure reforms in various applicability issues of the tax. So, to the extent that these have been supportive, the economy has been growing to an extent that brings a certain amount of cheer to the country. Well, global headwinds are there. Global headwinds, of course, on economic uncertainty that we are talking about. There is the issue about employment that India faces, and employment of the kind where we need inadequate number of skilled hands. The issue is to create the skill capacity of that employable population, which is being turned out. So to that remains a persistent challenge for us. Trade deficits, etc., continue. So I would like to say that the Indian economy as it stands now in a fairly strong position, driven by a robust kind of a services sector, government-led infrastructure and social spending. But it has to navigate a very complex global environment and address domestic challenges. So it's international and domestic both. Then to get on to the other challenge which has been thrown at us, and that challenge is regarding the tariff issues. I must mention that for over 3 decades, Washington has looked to India as an emerging market, a potential collaborator, to in a certain extent to be a counterweight to what they perceive to be counterweight to China, and a key partner in maintaining the kind of Indo-Pacific security which a rising democratic nation would like to have as it suits Washington. India shedding its, what I would call a certain level of suspicion of Washington, had nuanced itself and Washington, why I say suspicion is, to a certain extent, India was suspicious of the fact that Washington was financing Pakistan in a large number of ways, and we have our differences with Pakistan. But that suspicion has been shared over the last decade, I would say, and India was moving closer to Washington. I guess this has all been obliterated in the last 3 to 4 months, and there have been a lot of suspicions on both sides. Now, the 25% additional levy that has been put onto India for supposedly buying Russian oil, has, in a large number of ways, puzzled Indians. And in some ways outraged the citizenry also. Why? Because it was the Biden administration which encouraged India to buy Russian oil to reduce the oil shock, to reduce inflationary pressures operating in that market. And, well, it suited us also, so we went ahead with it. But Europe is buying the oil, and so is China, but the additional levy has been imposed on India. Now, the good part of this levy and the outrage that I talked about in India is that the constantly quibbling political parties in India, for a change, have come together, and all of them speak on the same voice. So that's the outrage that I refer to, and everybody is wondering and as to why, and supporting the government in whatever stand that is taking. Now, the tariff, like it or not, is going to hurt us. It will cause huge amount of job losses. It may cost factory closings if it continues the way it has been. But at the same time, I would reckon that for policymakers in India, it's a defining moment in a large number of ways, because India needs to sit back, take a resolute position, and decide for itself how it is going to be planning to be moving forward. Should it submit to whatever Washington has imposed upon it, and or in some ways strengthen its partnership with China, go about with a pragmatic kind of rapprochement with China, as steps seem to be going in, and in the larger context, be aware of the fact, be cognizant of the fact that is Washington reliable in the long run? Will they be weaponizing a tariff kind of a situation in future also? To that extent, we need to take a seat back and look at it again. I think the Prime Minister Modi's visit to Tianjin in a large number of ways has provided a momentous opportunity for these countries, member countries of the SCO, to reassess the situation as it unfolds. With China, we do have lingering disputes. Cannot help it. We share a 3,500 kilometer long border, largely undemarcated. So obviously there is going to be some difference in it. But it has, the SCO summit has in a large number of ways succeeded in reinforcing ties with Russia, formalized what I would call the thaw in our thinking with China, and brought about, which to us mattered a lot, which was that tragic incident which took place in J&K in a place called Pahalgam, which has been mentioned for condemnation of whatever that activity was. So, but at the same time, it has brought about some reactions from Washington and the Trump administration too. For whatever be the optics, the US Secretary of State has mentioned that this month we are spotlighting, that is India and US, spotlighting people, progress, and possibilities driving us forward. This is a change from innovation and entrepreneurship to defense and bilateral ties. It's the enduring friendship between India and the USA that fuels this journey. Quite a change from what the actions were. To that side, the mood in Tianjin and the optics indicated that US threats at the same time will not make India capitulate. And I think to that extent, it has been a good development. Now, how do we go about dealing with we have assessed the situation, we have decided that we will not capitulate and broad base our exports and dealings with other countries. India trades with 220 countries, out of which 40 countries now we are going to be pushing forward and ensuring that this broad base of export and other activities will continue to be taken. There has been turbulence, but at the same time, the reactions from India towards whatever has happened in Washington has been very sedate, very mature, very low-key, and to that extent, we have not closed doors. Those will always be consistency of planning over the long time will continue. And at the same time, we are now, as I mentioned, looking at our interests in China, thawing, but with China, as I mentioned earlier, we have a very complex relationships. There has been some suspicions, but to the extent that the summit served for geopolitical signaling with highly choreographed, I called it choreographed because the three leaders got together, designed for maximum optics, and I think it has delivered to the global populace some kind of a message. Chinese foreign minister's visit was extremely welcomed in India. It opened a lot of doors. Lots of suspicions were removed, and both the countries decided that in the interest of global and their own personal countries' interests, we have to endure and continue to trade with each other and try and have a strategic understanding for exchanges between the two countries. Now, India, teaming up with China definitely cannot offset the blow that US tariffs may be introducing, but to the extent that it can, that we propose to take it forward in whatever way that a nuanced, multi-layered strategic approach for selective strategic management and engagement, as the Indian and Chinese government has put it. So, to a certain extent, we also feel that warming to China will complicate our relationship with the US also, as some statements which have emanated out of Washington. But then that's a balancing act that India will have to perform. So it's a very careful balancing act, very pragmatic kind of diplomacy which will have to be deployed, because over-reliance on China could deepen vulnerabilities also that India feels, and at the same time, over-deployment on China may create to the Western world a kind of suspicion in the minds. So India would have to tread carefully, balancing trade, security, and strategic interests while keeping both China and Washington in their radar. That's how the stage stands today, and hopefully we'll have a very nice and productive discussion on it. Thank you very much for giving me this.
Thank you, Mr. Rai. Next, we have Dr. Miao Yanliang. He is the Chief Strategist and Executive Head of Research at China International Capital Corporation. He previously served as Chief Economist at China State Administration of Foreign Exchange and has also worked at the IMF, Bank of Israel, and Princeton University. He is an adjunct professor at Peking University and serves on various academic and advisory boards. Dr. Miao holds a PhD, MA, and MPA from Princeton University and an MA from Fudan University. Dr. Miao, may I invite you on stage, please?
I'm very glad to be here. I think the stage is already very well set up. I just want to, share with you my reading of the Chinese economy. I want to bring to your attention, say, if we can fast backward to a year ago, today, almost exactly a year ago. If people tell you a year from now, the Asia market will be among the best performing stock market in the world, and the Asia market will be leading, rebounding like 27% YTD. And then renminbi will actually appreciate instead of depreciate, facing, tariff, etc. I think it will be hard to believe, but that's what happened for the past 9 months. So that brings me to, the difficulty, the confusion, in reading the Chinese economy. I have been fortunate to working, in both government sector, international organization, now private sector, and I teach in Tsinghua and Peking University. I met many investors, academia as well. So in general, I see three disconnects in reading the Chinese economy. And then I try to help, how to reconcile this disconnect by my way of, trying to grasp the most important things to understand what's happening in China. So first, I want to share with you the three disconnects. Number one is top-down view versus bottom-up view. I'm generally a top-down guy, so I look at the macro number, CPI, etc. You know that China's CPI is not doing, is like hovering around 0. Used to be the core CPI is around 1.5, so we are in a low inflation environment. The GDP deflator has been negative for the 9 consecutive quarters. So if you look at top down, you probably think this economy is in a lot of challenge, which is true. But from a bottom up perspective, many private equity investors, they find it very cheap and good buys in China, and they find it very competitive. So this is number one disconnect. The number two disconnect is the outside view versus the within view. I'm not sure whether it's Alfred shared with me or is another IMF colleague shared with me. He said, the Chinese economy is probably somewhere between China Daily and the Washington Post. So this is the outside view versus within view, right? And then we also hear, when this new tariff was first imposed, President Trump said, China economy will be in very big trouble if he, doesn't pose a tariff. So I think this disconnect is also very common. It depends on where you are, outside versus the within view. The third disconnect is really the government view versus private sector view of perception. Central government still believes that local government needs fiscal discipline. I worked in the Euro area debt crisis programs. It's similar, Chinese local government is like peripheral European countries. So some central government officials think they need to be disciplined. Okay, and then yet private sector always hoping for more fiscal stimulus. If we look at the leverage, I think the household leverage stopped leveraging up. It's like around 60% for past 5 years, didn't go up. And the government sector indeed have been leveraging up, especially since the turnaround of last September. It's September 24th. It's almost a year ago. So this is the disconnect we encounter every day, by investors, by academic. Now, why is that? Why is that? I think, I want to share with you the 1, 2, 3, 4 of the Chinese economy. Then once I completed 1, 2, 3, 4, I think we can reconcile these three disconnect. The one is the one challenge. The fundamental challenge to the Chinese economy is, what Alfred laid out in the opening, in the intro remark, is a growth model challenge. Right? We used to rely on real estate, rely on infrastructure, which is not surprising because China witnessed the most fastest urbanization and the industrialization process in human history in the past 40 years. But now with urbanization ratio 67%, Beijing and Shanghai were surpassing 80%. So that has been, very naturally has come to a plateau area. So we need to shift to more productive forces, or new quality productive forces. And how do we do that? That's mainly through two transitions. Number one is the digital transition. We all know in January this year, out of nowhere, the DeepSeek breakthrough. But I want to remind you, it's not just DeepSeek in AI. Many industries in China, they all have their own DeepSeek moment. Take the pharmaceutical, the new and innovative drugs, and then take the high-end equipment, right? My colleague reminded me, China just launched the world's first 6th-generation fighter jet, and also even in the new consumer industry, consumer product, the Labubu. I don't know whether you are a fan of Labubu. My two daughters are such a big fans of Labubu. Yes. So I think it's this is the digital transition. The second is the green transition. In that, whether it's the PV modulars or it's the electric vehicles, and China's EV is now over 60% of global production. But the majority of them, like 90%, is for domestic consumption. Okay, so now in every 2 cars sold in China, 1 is in EV. Okay, the share is CICC project is continue to rise. These 2 transitions, digital transition, green transition, they are doing very well, and then they are best embodied in the electrical vehicles, because you have both, you have digital, you have green transition there. So it's really very competitive. But the problem is, in terms of value added, they don't add just much GDP compared to real estate. So for example, last year, China probably sold 10 trillion renminbi new houses. China also sold 10 trillion renminbi new cars. But in terms of GDP valued, because the car industry, the supply chain is much longer. So the GDP value is only 1.5%. But for the new house sales is like almost 6%. So that's the problem. The problem is like it's not enough to counter the shortfall in domestic demand. So we need more measures. That's why I come to the next, the 3 forces. Number 1 is the financial cycle. Financial cycle usually lasts between 16 to 20 years, which means the down cycle is 8 to 10 years, up cycle is 8 to 10 years. This round, China's up cycle started from 2008 to 2017. It's like around 8 or 9 years. The down cycle, or the financial cycle, started with deleveraging from 2017. So we are now like well past 8 years. By the rule of thumb, it's like each half cycle is 8 to 10 years. You would think, we are now in the critical 8-year mark. So if you're very optimistic, you think maybe, China is bottoming out in terms of the financial cycle. If you're less optimistic, then you probably think, we need maybe 1 or 2 more years. And then if you're really pessimistic, then you think about, maybe, some other country. But there, I think it really depends on policy. But taking status quo, I think the most important driving force in understanding demand shortfall, in understanding deflation pressure, is from the down cycle or financial cycle. This is number 1 on the 3 forces. Number 2 is trade frictions. Trade frictions, of course, cause a lot of disruptions, but I think the end result is that China's share in global export is not declining, it's actually rising. Tariff didn't reduce global trade. Tariff actually increased global trade, because you have to do rerouting, you could do do global supply chain reshuffling. It just made the trade less efficient. Okay, that's my read of it. So if you think about it, the destination of Chinese export, the U.S. bound export dropped from almost 20% 7 years ago to less than 15% last year, and then in the first half of this year, it's like almost to 10%. The majority of the drop, almost all of them, went to this region, to the ASEAN region. Maybe like 1 percentage point went to Mexico or Eastern Europe. So that's the effect of tariff on Chinese export. But I think there's a more broader effect on tariff on the Chinese economy. That's the mindset. To me, tariff, I think, is a blessing in disguise. It's a blessing that push China to do the right policy, which is stimulate domestic consumption, to make the dual circulation circulate even better. This is number 2 in terms of the forces shaping the Chinese economy. Finally, we have the policy pivot is among the 3. We mentioned that like last September, fiscal policy become more stimulus, and then it's more front-loaded as well. And also, there's a huge drive towards consumption, innovation, and structural reforms. And then recently, I think there's a very China-specific, it's called evolution style competition. You know, what is evolution? Evolution is maybe somebody need to write an item in the economics dictionary. So people debate what is evolution. Evolution, I think to me, is you compete, but without any benefit. And then that normally will lead to a price decline or profit decline. So these are the three forces, I think, shaping the Chinese economy: financial cycle, tariffs, and then the policy pivot. You know, within all this, where does all this lead us to? I would conclude with the four fundamental strengths of the Chinese economy. These actually four fundamental strengths, I think India share a lot with China as well. The number one is the largest and the still rising middle class. We have 400 million middle class and rising. The number two is the most well-trained and importantly, most willing to work labor force. We have 250 million college-educated grads. And then China's weekly working hours is very long. It's 49 hours. The US is 34 hours. So if you say why it's so competitive, I think part of the reason lies in this. We just work long hours. And then infrastructure. I think here maybe China and India is slightly different. You know, China has this high-speed rail network dominance. Many of you may have experienced. But here, I want to emphasize, it's not because the Chinese government is subsidizing it. It's really, I think, most importantly, is economy of scale and innovation. And then I think India will likely also benefit from this economy of scale. This is, I think, is something new. I mean, when we learn economics, we know that diminishing return to, you know, and the rising 2 minutes, okay, and the rising marginal cost. But with the digital revolution, I think this traditional feature is not as dominant. So probably, you know, now it's more like whoever has the largest market, and we're enjoying more economy of scale. And then we see both India and China share this luck. You know, we have the very large domestic market, but we have to make sure that this market is unified. I think that's the same challenge both China and India face. That we need to have a unified national domestic market. Last but not least, China's fundamental strength is in this very comprehensive and complete supply chain. If you indulge me for one example, okay, many of you may have tried Peking duck. Then Peking duck in a fancy restaurant costs you like $50 and up, but now like in some of the street stand, Peking duck is only sell like for $3 or $4. And then you look at that, you probably think, wow, is that safe to eat? And then, but I tell you an example. That's the beauty of economy of scale. Because if you are taking the meat and the skin, you are doing whoever produces the dog a favor. Because the dog's feathers are used to make winter wear. Its neck is used to make a snack. Almost everything else has been very well utilized. Now it's only the meat and the skin nobody is willing to take. If you take it for $3, you're doing them a favor. That's the beauty of the competitiveness of very comprehensive and complete supply chain. And then China is benefiting from it. So to conclude, so why you see it differently from top-down and bottom-up? Because top-down is the financial cycle. Bottom-up is the two transitions. Why you're seeing it differently from outside and then from within? Because outside, you're mainly focused on tariff. But inside or within, you can see that the economy is very resilient. It's resilient. The fundamental resilience lies in its people. Then why you see it differently from government versus the private sector? Well, that's, I think it's not something surprising, right? Because now I'm in the private sector, quote unquote. We want the market to always go up. We want always to have more stimulus. So that's what I have to share with you. Thank you very much. Thank you.